There are stories that enter not just our minds, but settle quietly inside our hearts. And tonight, the story you are about to hear is one of them. A story born in the cold breath of winter, shaped by the footsteps of wanderers, and illuminated by the rare glow of human kindness. This is Charles Dickens' The Poor Traveler, retold slowly, delicately, with all the emotions of a man remembering a night that changed him forever. Close your eyes, let the world fall silent, and enter a small town on a cold Christmas Eve. Chapter 1. The House of the Poor Traveler. The night was cruel, not merely cold, but merciless, the kind of cold that does not stop at the skin. It pierced through layers of clothing as if they were nothing, slipping past wool and leather, creeping silently into the bones, and settling there like an unwelcome guest. The streets of Rochester lay abandoned and lifeless, stretched out under the pale moonlight like a frozen dream. Not a single soul stirred. No laughter, no footsteps, only the howl of the icy wind as it rushed through the narrow lanes, as though the entire town had retreated indoors, surrendering the night to winter's fury. My boots felt unbearably heavy, as if they carried not just my body but the weight of every mile I had walked. Each step echoed with fatigue, telling the story of a long and difficult journey, of roads that never seemed to end, of hopes clutched tightly against despair, and of countless moments endured in silence. My breath rose before me in thin, trembling clouds, pale and fleeting, like faint ghosts dancing briefly in the air before vanishing into the darkness. It felt as though even my breath was tired of staying with me. And then, I saw it. A small, weather-beaten signboard swayed above an old, humble building, moving gently with the wind. Its edges were worn smooth by time, its surface scarred by years of rain, frost, and forgotten nights. It creaked softly as it swung back and forth, a tired, familiar sound, almost as if the sign itself were alive, whispering to passers-by, calling out to those who had nowhere else to go. Painted upon it, in letters faded yet dignified, were the words, "The Watts' Charity, 6 poor travelers lodged every night." In that moment, those words struck my heart with unexpected force. They felt like warm hands reaching out to a freezing, broken soul, hands that did not ask who I was or where I came from. Just an offer, just kindness. A quiet promise of shelter, a soft whisper of comfort in a world that had shown very little of it. When I stepped inside, warmth greeted me like a gentle embrace. The cold loosened its grip on my face, and a soft heat kissed my numb cheeks, slowly bringing life back into them. The glow of a small fire flickered across the modest room, painting the walls with moving shadows that danced like silent companions. An elderly caretaker looked up at me, his eyes stern from years of responsibility, yet softened by a lifetime of serving the weary and the forgotten. He studied me for only a moment, as if he already knew my story. Without asking unnecessary questions, without demanding explanations, he simply nodded toward a small, simple bed. One of 6, clean, warm, waiting. And tonight, it was meant for me. I lay down, my tired body sinking into the mattress as a deep sigh escaped my lips. For the first time in many hours, perhaps many days, I allowed myself to believe that the struggle was over, that the night had finally granted me peace. Little did I know that fate had something far more profound waiting in the shadows, a moment that would stay with me long after this cold night had passed. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the 7th Traveler. Just as sleep was beginning to gather around me, slowly, gently, like a long-awaited blanket easing the aches from my weary body, the fragile peace of the night was torn apart by a sudden, violent sound. Bang, bang, bang. The noise echoed through the quiet house, sharp and urgent, like a cry forced out of the darkness itself. It was not the knock of confidence, nor of entitlement. It was the knock of desperation. A clenched fist striking wood, again and again, as though time itself were running out. The caretaker stiffened. His brow creased, not with irritation, but with recognition. He knew that sound well. It was the sound of another soul who had walked too far, endured too much, and finally reached the edge of hope. Another lost wanderer of the night, driven by cold and fate to this single door. Slowly, almost solemnly, he opened it. There, standing between two worlds, behind him the warm golden glow of the fire, and before him the pale silver moonlight of the frozen street, stood a young soldier. The winter had not spared him. Cold clung to his body as though it owned him. His clothes were damp, his breath shallow, his frame trembling ever so slightly. His uniform, once crisp and proud, now hung loosely upon him, thinned by time, hardship, and neglect. Mud caked his boots, each stain a silent witness to the miles he had walked without rest. His shoulders sagged, not merely from exhaustion, but from the crushing weight of everything he had carried for far too long. Yet it was his eyes that held us. Those eyes told a story no words could fully express. They were tired, terribly tired, but not broken. Within them lived a quiet tragedy, a deep well of suffering never spoken aloud. And still beneath all that pain there burned a fragile flame of dignity. He did not demand. He did not accuse. He did not beg for pity. He simply stood there, waiting. When he spoke, his voice was thin and worn, as if each word cost him more strength than he could afford. "My name is Richard." A pause. A breath. "I beg you for a night's rest." The caretaker's gaze fell to the floor. The answer he carried was not cruel, but it was heavy. "We have beds only for 6, he said quietly. "You would be the 7th. The soldier did not protest. He did not argue. Instead, he bowed his head, just slightly, as though he had prepared himself for this moment long before it arrived. His breath trembled, fogging the cold air, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer still, almost fragile. "I ask for nothing more than a corner of the floor," he said, "if you would be kind enough to allow it." At that instant, something deep within me tightened painfully. His humility struck my heart like a sudden blow. In him, I saw every tired traveler, every forgotten man, every soul that had learned not to expect kindness. The thought of this young soldier, who had once stood in battle, who had once served with honor, lying on bare, frozen boards, was unbearable. His bones ached for warmth, his spirit for rest. Before I could second-guess myself, I rose from my bed. "Take mine," I said quietly, though my voice carried more conviction than I felt. "I shall sit by the fire." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for a moment pride rose in his expression. Not arrogance, but the dignity of a man unaccustomed to taking what he had not earned. He resisted gently, almost apologetically, but exhaustion won, as it always does. Slowly, with deep gratitude written across his face, he accepted. He lay down, and for the first time since he had arrived, his shoulders eased. None of us knew. Not the caretaker, not the sleeping travelers, not even the soldier himself, that this simple act of kindness would mark the final chapter of his life. That this borrowed bed, on a cold winter night, would become his last place of rest. Chapter 3. The Soldier's Story. The fire crackled softly, its gentle sound filling the room like a slow, steady heartbeat. Flames danced and curled, throwing long, trembling shadows across the walls, shadows that seemed to breathe, to listen, to remember. The other travelers lay wrapped in sleep, their faces calm, unaware of the quiet weight resting in the air. But the soldier and I remained awake, seated close to the warmth, bound together by a silence so thick it felt alive, heavy with thoughts too painful, too personal, to be spoken aloud. I studied him carefully. His skin was pale, drained of warmth and color. His lips were dry and cracked, shaped by cold winds and countless unslept nights. The firelight touched his face softly, catching in his eyes half lit, half lost, eyes that carried stories no one had ever asked him to tell. With a voice as gentle as the flickering flame, I finally broke the silence. "Where have you come from?" He closed his eyes at once, not to avoid the question, but to gather the strength to answer it. It was as if he were searching through dark, crowded corridors of memory, places filled with pain he had long tried to outrun. When he opened them again, his eyes glimmered faintly, not with hope, but with the fragile light of a soul that had carried far more than it ever should have. "I have traveled far," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the fire itself. "From war. From battlefields smeared with mud and blood. From lands where the sky was never clear, where it was always choked with smoke, and the earth itself trembled beneath the thunder of cannon fire." He stopped then, his chest rising and falling unevenly. His breath shook, as though the memories had tightened their grip around his heart, refusing to let go. "I fought for my country," he continued slowly, carefully. "I returned with honor." A bitter pause followed, but honor does not fill the stomach, nor does it guarantee a place to call home. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmoving. The fire seemed to burn quieter, as though even it had grown solemn. The room felt smaller, weighed down by the truth of what he had said. After a moment he spoke again, each sentence unraveling another thread of his sorrow. "When I returned, the world had changed," he said softly. "People I once knew had moved on. Faces I remembered had vanished." He hesitated, swallowing hard, as if the next word might break him. "Home." His voice faltered. Home no longer existed for me. As he spoke, his voice trembled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, fragile quiver of a man who had endured loneliness deeper than any physical wound. He spoke of endless roads walked on blistered feet, of nights spent hungry beneath open skies, of promises made and forgotten by a world too busy to remember him. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were wet, shimmering in the firelight, yet still strong, still proud. "People see the uniform," he said quietly, "but they do not see the wounds hidden inside." His hands trembled as they rested near the fire, fingers stiff and worn. His body sagged with exhaustion, but not the kind cured by sleep alone. It was the weariness of life itself, of a man who had given everything and returned with nothing but memories too heavy to carry alone. Chapter 4. The final night. As midnight slowly crept across the darkened sky, the fire that had once burned brightly now surrendered to time, shrinking into a bed of glowing embers. Their soft red light pulsed gently, as though the room itself were breathing. The quiet inside the house deepened into something almost sacred, a stillness untouched by fear or noise. It was the kind of hush that belongs only to places where exhausted souls have finally allowed themselves to rest, where peace exists, fragile and fleeting, but real. The soldier lay back upon the bed, not mine anymore. His, now, a simple mattress, thin and worn, yet in that moment more valuable than gold. It was the final gift offered by a stranger, given without ceremony, without expectation. His body sank into it with a weary surrender, as though he had been waiting a lifetime to lie down without fear of what might come next. His breathing began to slow, at first steady, then softer, each breath lighter than the last, as if the weight he had carried for so long was finally being set down. The rise and fall of his chest grew gentler, more delicate, like waves retreating from a quiet shore. I leaned closer, my heart tightening with a sudden unexplainable fear. The firelight flickered across his face, now calm, now strangely peaceful. In a trembling voice I asked, "Shall I fetch a doctor?" He opened his eyes just enough to look at me, and then he smiled. It was a small smile, a quiet smile, not one of joy but of relief. The kind of smile that speaks without words, that says he had fought enough, walked enough, suffered enough. A smile that belonged to a man who was no longer afraid. "No," he whispered, his voice barely more than breath. I only need rest." He paused, gathering what little strength remained. "That is all I have desired. For a long, long time." His eyelids fluttered softly like the final trembling flame of a candle just before it goes out. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. His chest rose gently and fell. And then it did not rise again. The soldier slipped away as peacefully as a tired child drifting into sleep after a long, painful day. There was no cry, no struggle, no fear, only stillness. A silence so complete, it felt holy. A life shaped by battles and hardship came to its end not on a battlefield but in warmth, not among enemies but among strangers, with dignity, with kindness, on a simple charity bed, on a cold Christmas Eve. Chapter 5. Morning farewell. Dawn arrived slowly, almost hesitantly, as though the morning itself feared disturbing the stillness left behind by the night. Pale gold light crept through the narrow windows, spreading softly across the silent room. It touched the walls, the floor, and finally the motionless form upon the bed, gentle, respectful, as if offering a quiet farewell to a soul that had already moved beyond the cold and pain of this world. The caretaker and I stood beside the soldier's still body. Neither of us spoke. Words felt small and useless in the presence of such loss. A deep sorrow settled in our chests, heavy, aching, and shared. Though we had known him for only a few hours, his passing felt personal, as if the night had bound us together in grief. With careful hands and bowed heads, we began to prepare him for his final rest. Every movement was slow and deliberate, filled with respect. We wrapped him gently in clean cloth, as one would care for a loved one, mindful not to disturb the calm that now rested upon his face. His uniform was straightened, the creases smoothed, as if returning to him a measure of the dignity life had denied him. He looked peaceful, no longer burdened by hunger, by cold, or by the long road he had walked alone. Beside him we placed the few possessions he carried through his hard journey. A tiny medal dulled and scratched by time and weather, yet still bearing silent witness to his courage. A small worn Bible, its pages softened by countless turns, perhaps read in moments of fear or hope. And a letter, yellowed with age, carefully folded, never opened. A letter meant for someone who might never know how close it came to being delivered. When word of the soldier's death spread through the town, people came quietly one by one. They did not come out of curiosity, but out of compassion. Faces lined with age, worry, and kindness gathered together, each heart touched by the story of a man who had died without complaint, without family, without recognition, save for the kindness of strangers. A funeral was held, simple and unadorned. There were no drums to mark his passing, no speeches to praise his service, no military salute to honor his sacrifice. None of the grand rituals of war followed him here. Instead, there was something far purer. A small circle of people stood together, ordinary men and women, their humble faces softened by sympathy and quiet respect. They bowed their heads in silence, mourning a soldier they had never known, yet felt compelled to honor. In that stillness, his life was acknowledged. His suffering was seen. I placed a wooden cross upon his grave, pressing it firmly into the earth. With steady hands I carved the words, "To Richard, who fought bravely, traveled far, and found peace at last." As we stepped back, the morning wind stirred gently, brushing past us like a whispered prayer. It moved through the trees and across the open ground, soft and calm, as if carrying his spirit away from hardship, toward warmer skies, quieter roads, and the rest he had long been denied. Chapter 6. What that night taught me. Before leaving Rochester, I paused once more before the old charity house, allowing myself a final moment to stand in its quiet presence. The building looked the same as it had that night, modest, weathered, unremarkable to the passing eye. Yet to me it now felt deeply sacred. Its worn walls seemed to hold memories, as if they remembered every weary traveler who had crossed its threshold, seeking nothing more than warmth and mercy. Above the door, the familiar sign creaked softly in the morning wind, swaying back and forth like a gentle reminder of its promise. 6 poor travelers lodged every night. The words were simple, practical, almost ordinary. And yet I knew the truth they did not fully tell. For one extraordinary night, the house had sheltered a 7th, a forgotten soldier, a tired wanderer, a man whose strength had been spent on distant battlefields and endless roads. A man whose final wish was not glory, nor reward, nor recognition, but simply rest. As I stood there, something within me shifted. I understood a truth deeper than any sermon, stronger than any lesson spoken from a pulpit. It was not learned from books or speeches, but from a single act of kindness given in the dark. Kindness does not count numbers. Compassion does not measure worth. A truly warm heart always finds space, even when there seems to be none left, for one more soul. In that moment, Dickens's message echoed clearly within me, not as words on a page, but as a living truth. In a world heavy with suffering, where pain often goes unnoticed, the smallest acts of kindness shine brighter than the grandest monuments of stone and marble. They ask for no praise, leave no statues behind, yet their impact lingers quietly, long after the moment has passed. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can offer another human being is not wealth, nor power, nor answers, but simply a place to rest. And so ends The Poor Traveler, a story shaped by sorrow, humility, and the quiet heroism of compassion. A reminder that dignity can exist even in poverty, and that humanity often reveals itself most clearly in the smallest gestures. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you, however gently, of the power of kindness, then share it, so its warmth may reach even more souls wandering through cold and lonely nights. Thank you for listening. May we all find the courage to offer comfort when it is needed most, and the grace to accept it when it is offered to us.